I think up first is Brendan.
Yeah.
So whenever you're ready, Brendan, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Brendan Wiltshire, and what I want to first preface this is that I'm not using a PowerPoint, so I'm actually using an Esri Experience Builder. So what I did was I created an app really quickly, put my presentation into it, and I kind of wanted to show off what I've been doing for the last 2 years in this program. So this is that product. So I just wanted to preface that really quick. But let's go ahead and dive in. This is evaluating veterans' travel time barriers and social disparities to VA healthcare access in Texas. So I am a current, my employer is Esri. So essentially I work as an associate technical consultant. What does that mean? It basically means that I help customers utilize Esri technology on a daily basis. I listen to their concerns and what they're doing with their technology, and I help them bring those, GIS visions to life. What I work mostly in is a little bit of ArcPro. I really do a lot in Server 123 and ArcGIS Mission, but I kind of touch everything, especially Experience Builder, which is what this is. So this is my research question. My research question is going to drive my entire study. So do veterans in Texas meet the VA's required 30-minute and 60-minute hospital travel time standards? And are social vulnerable veterans disproportionately located in areas that fall outside of these thresholds? So meaning, and in short, is do these access standards are they being met based on VA's own standards? So can veterans hit these standards, hitting a basic clinic and a hospital in 30 minutes and 60 minutes? What's not included in my study? We're not going to discuss VA healthcare eligibility. We're not going to discuss private care. There's a lot of red tape with getting into the VA and getting into healthcare eligibility, and there's a lot of red tape with private care. We're not going to touch that in the study. Why does this analysis matter? Texas is home to about 1.4 million veterans, the second largest veteran population in the US. That's based on what I found in the US, census data. And then we start talking about these 30 to 60-minute standards. So VA has set a 30-minute standard for basically a primary care clinic and a 60-minute standard for a hospital. So I'm going to be showing throughout my presentation what those standards look like in the state of Texas. Equity in healthcare, this matters a lot. Are veterans, getting fair access to healthcare based on disabilities, things like that, and also are they being able to hit these travel times? I have a personal stake in this because I'm a U.S. Army veteran, so I've been in the VA system for at least 13 years. I've been in it several different states, and I can say and I can attest that the care is not the same in each state, so keep that in mind. For the next, several slides for the rest of my presentation, I really want you guys to hone in on these two terms because I'm going to be saying them a lot. So VA Medical Center or VMAC is a full service VA hospital, meaning it handles surgery. It's a full service stop shop. Community-based outpatient clinics, or CBOCs for short, they're local clinics that extend VA healthcare into communities. They're very small. They just handle like your primary care type things, health, wellness visits, urgent care, things like that. But they don't handle surgery. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the facilities and their service areas. So on the left, and this is going to translate through the rest of the tabs as well. On the left, you're always going to have CBOC, and on the right, you're always going to have VA hospitals. So on the left, we're going to start there, and I'll bring up this legend to kind of give you an idea of what you're looking at. So the plus signs are the facilities for CBOCs, and then you have the green areas or service areas. So meaning that's how far those areas are meeting the 30-minute standard and the 60-minute standard. So if I zoom into one of these in Amarillo out here in the black area, you're not meeting the 30-minute standard. Same for Amarillo in the hospital side, there's a lot of black areas. So if you don't hear anything else in my study, what I want to really hone in here is that the black area is the underserved area in Texas on for hospitals and VA CBOCs. So all this area is underserved. They're not meeting the standard in these two areas. So goals and objectives of my study: evaluate veterans travel time access to VA care in Texas, identify social vulnerability, populations with limited access. And then I wanted to measure the outpatient standard for 30 minutes, 60 minutes. And then what I did was my goal was to integrate ACS veteran population data, turn those into these centroids so I could use that as population data and then measure that against social vulnerability and then create some visualization products. Discussion of previous research, I'll get into that now. Previous research, I'm only going to hit a few things. I condensed it down a little bit. Travel burden is a strong predictor of healthcare utilization and reduced access. What does that mean? That means if you have a very large travel time, you tend to not want to go to the doctor. And then rural veterans face these, multiple barriers, including disability, poverty, those kinds of things, limited transportation. And then you have social vulnerability, it intensifies all the things I just mentioned. And then you have OD, spatial accessibility tools like OD matrix and clustering analysis provides more access, more accurate measurements of these things. That's kind of what I found in my literature review. This is the summary of that review. So distance is the main barrier to care. Rule settings, compound inequities, and better methods like travel time analysis provide a clear measure of access. That's what I did in the study, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a little bit. Telehealth helps. That's looking at a doctor through a computer. It is not going to help you with surgery, so still doesn't help with the hospital issue. And then you have to have an equity lens when you look at all this stuff to say, is there travel time issues and SVI issues? So research gap. One of the things I noticed here is that most people are doing a national focus study. So they're looking at veteran populations and these issues on a US scale, not on a state scale. My study looks at just the state of Texas. And then few studies are integrating like these travel time analysis with social vulnerability metrics as well. So now I'm going to get into my data and methodology, and I'll show you the analysis as well. So quickly, I'll just go over this. The data sets I used were VA facility data directly from the VA. ACS 5-year estimates represented as block group centroids, so showing your population as block group centroids. That's how I got around with, I did this. And then I did social vulnerability index with that. And then I used an Esri street map. I used an mobile map package based for strictly Texas for routing and travel times. This is what my methodology looked like. So when I first started this study, I had gathered up my data sources. I did my data preparation. I did an access. I did all my analysis, which you don't have to focus on that right now. I'm going to discuss that in a minute. And then I did an equity assessment. So I compared my analysis to SVI data, and then I made some visualization products. So the methods overview, these are the three things I did in my study, and then I will show you as well on what the outcomes were. So I did a drive time polygon analysis, which you guys saw just a minute ago, which were the green polygons that showed the service area. And then I did an OD cost matrix, which basically calculates the travel times from those populated weighted block group centroids to the nearest VA facility to gather up our travel times based on cars, so car travel times. And then I did a LISA or a local Moran's eye, which helps you detect where if there is clustering or is it clustered randomly or distributed in these areas. So now I'm going to get into my actual analysis and run you guys through that. So as always, on your left is going to be your CBOCs. On your right is going to be your VA medical centers. Legend, the only thing I really want you guys to pay attention to is the pink dots. The pink dots are where the VA is meeting the standard for CBOCs and VMAX. So what I want to do now is I want to filter that down for you guys. So let's look at it where it's meeting the standard. So you can see now it's meeting the standard in these areas. So basically they're hovering around the actual facilities. So what I want to look at now is who's not meeting the standard. So if you look at where the green areas are, everything past them is not meeting the standard, whether it's by 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 6 hours, they're not meeting the standard. So it's a lot of dots in these areas that are not meeting the standard. And I'll further prove that as we go down my analysis. Now let's look at SVI and travel time. So basically I combine travel times with SVI data. This right here looks at those high SVI and high travel times. And then those are red dots. Green dots are low travel times and low SVI. So I can filter that down for you as well. So looking at high travel times, high SVI, kind of showing, these rural areas are really clustered. And then I can show you same kind of thing. So these green dots are really clustering around the actual facilities. So if you get past those, you're not meeting the standard and you're getting way out here, you're really not doing well. The last analysis I did was a LISA analysis. So here what I want to highlight is the red dots are high clusters. What it looks at is only travel times. So the high clusters are long travel times surrounded by other long travel times, and it clusters them together. And then the blue dots are short travel times surrounded by other short travel times. So I'm going to filter this down and just kind of get rid of the blue dots to show you where, oh, my bad, clicked the wrong one. So these are these are all the areas where you're having high travel times with high travel times. It's a lot. And if we filter it down even further to just where it's meeting the standard, it's again showing you third analysis that it's all meeting the standard around just the areas that actually have a facility. And so what I figured out from the Lisa is that systemic, local Ramsay confirms the VA outpatient access inequities are regional and structural, not isolated or incidental. And then later on, I have a slide talking about systemic, which means that the problem is built into the structure of the system. It's not caused by a single location or random chance. So this is not random, it's built in. So for my results, outpatient care, CBOCs, metropolitan areas they're meeting the 30-minute standard. Rural regions show persistent access gaps. OD modeling reveals underserved populations even inside areas that appear covered by drive time buffers. So it's accounting for traffic. And then specialty care, VMAX, hospital level access is heavily centralized. Large rural regions fall far outside the 60-minute standard. And then many veterans in West Texas, this is a big point here in the Panhandle, all kind of face this 2 to 4+ hour travel time. So if you're in West Texas and you got to go to somewhere like Amarillo or the middle of Dallas, you could go 4 hours, 6 hours, and that's one way. And then equity findings, high SBI communities consistently experience these great travel burdens. And then the local Moran's eye is just showing, an equities clustered regionally, confirming systemic rather than random patterns. So if my core message here is VA access standards are met in major metro areas, but large parts of Texas, predominantly rural and vulnerable communities, do not meet the required travel time thresholds. This is basically my travel times in graph form. So if you're looking at the top graph, CBOC 30-minute access compliance, the pink area shows you where it's meeting its standard. So CBOCs are doing semi-okay. They're meeting it at about 73% of the time. VA hospitals, on the other hand, is failing about almost 50% of the time to meet their own standard. So that's, I used ArcPro to kind of go through this analysis and look at the data and put it into graph form so I could really kind of drive home my point of who's meeting and who's not meeting their own standard. And then as I get into, my conclusion, policy implications here, what needs to happen to fix this problem? Improving outpatient access, CBOCs, we need to expand the CBOC coverage in underserved regions, strengthen transportation and support and community care partnerships, and then possibly look at deploying mobile specialty care teams or expanding telehealth. Telehealth works for the CBOCs really well, but for VMAX, looking at specialty care, it doesn't work as well because if you're doing surgery, you can't do that over telehealth. So for VMAX, my recommendation is you're going to have to put more hospitals in, and then equity focused planning using this combined SVI travel time framework to prioritize the high risk communities, and then looking where like high I Lisa clustering is and trying to put more resources there. My core message here is policy solutions must match the scale and geography of the inequity. So meaning we need solutions to match the size of Texas. A lot of these areas are missing, it's a very large state. And my conclusion here and what the study demonstrates is access to outpatient care is uneven and specialty care access is severely limited across rural Texas. High SVI communities consistently face the longest travel times and greatest barriers. Spatial methods reveal structural inequities and identify where interventions are most urgently needed. So meaning my study can help the VA figure out spatially using GIS technology where to put their interventions and their policies to fix these problems. And my final takeaway is Texas veterans do not experience equitable access to VA healthcare, but spatial evidence provides a practical foundation for targeted improvements in VA planning and service delivery. What that means is you could use a study like the one I created and combine what the VA is already doing, add in the red tape that I said I was not in the study, add in the outpatient or the specialty care that they do outside the VA. So any partnerships they have with other hospitals or specialty care that they have or community care that they have, put that into the study, rerun the study and where those places are and somehow figure out how to put in, who's eligible for that care. And then they could really hone in to figure out exactly where they need to put new hospitals and CBOCs to really bring those numbers up from 58 and 74 to maybe 80 and 90% to really hit their own targets of 60 and 30 minutes. This concludes my presentation. If you have questions, as I said, as the professor said, if I don't know right off the bat, you can put it in the chat. I'll also read them from the chat. And then if I don't have it right away, I will definitely get you an answer as soon as I can. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Brennan. That was great. Your experience builder really helped to visualize the pattern. So that worked out great.
I'm glad it worked.
Looks like you have a question in the chat window.
Yeah. Very interesting project results. Thank you. In the LISA, with so much high in East Texas, does VA expect those Texans seek care in Louisiana clinics, CBOCs? This is a great question. I'm glad somebody asked this question because I actually looked this up and I have personal experience. So the way the VA works is you have networks. So you might, if you're in Colorado, you have the Rocky Mountain VA, and then if you're in the like Gulf Coast, you have the Gulf Coast VA. So no, what they do is they have their own networks, and so they're not going to have you go to like New Mexico unless you're inside the net, inside like the Texas VA network. Probably should know more about that, but most of the time they're going to force you to go into the Texas VA network. They're going to make you drive to that hospital. It does not matter if it's 4 hour drive. That's where you're going to go because it's in network. Hope that answers your question. What would be next for the project? I like I was saying is to hone the study now, you really have to look at the red tape of getting VA healthcare. There, you got to be eligible. You have to serve in the military. You have to be eligible to get in, and then it goes into a disability status to get care, right? So, however much disability puts you in line in front of others to get care faster than others. If they don't have care, they can send you out in the community. So then I would need to figure out those eligibility requirements. I would need to figure out what does it take to get community care? Is there a dollar amount? Is there an eligibility requirement? And then I would need to rerun my study somehow with those parameters to really fine tune where, hey, we're actually meeting it a little bit better with community care access, but we still need a hospital here or there type thing. So that's what I would need to figure out. That's a great question.
One question that I had. So
Yeah.
you're kind of making an assumption, at least that's what I've been able to underscore here, is that you're treating veterans as kind of a blanket thing or variable, and then your
Yes.
hospitals are sort of a common variable. But veterans aren't all the same, right? They're different ages, different and a number of different things that you can stratify either a veteran by or even hospitals, right? Because different hospitals have different services and care and so forth. So could you envision a way that these stratifications could either hurt or improve the current, distribution of travel times and so forth? Or are there other? I guess what I'm trying to say are there other ways that you could slice and dice this, or other data that could present a different perspective on the situation?
Yes, sir. I do agree that you are correct. I would have liked to include things like based on sex or based on like age, race, that kind of thing. But I got into a point where this got so big of workload in terms of like, the 4 months we had to do the class, and I was like, I had to start cutting things. And this is one of the things I looked at originally. So yes, I would like because I think it would help hone in this SVI data to figure out like who has a vehicle, who doesn't. There's also this thing where going into a hospital, like you don't want to go in a hospital because you don't want people to know you have a problem. Those are issues that I'd want to look into and figure out how to slice the project up even further because my goal of the whole study, right, is to figure out where can we add additional resources to get this number to meet these standards faster. So I agree with you. I just didn't have enough time.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Understood. All right. Well, great job.
Thank
If
you.
you could put your email in the chat, so if someone wants to contact you with a follow-up, that'd be great.
Yes, sir. I can do that.
Um, and then up next, Graham, if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen, we'll get you all set up and ready to go.
Sure thing.
We can see your presentation.
It's okay. Good evening. My name is Graham Anderson. I've spent nearly a decade now working in the offshore construction industry, specifically the undersea fiber optic cable system field. I currently serve as a senior manager in GIS and planning and engineering support for some of these cable projects. And throughout my career, I've spent many months on the cable ships that install these systems, and the existing workflows are effective, get the job done. But from my perspective and my experience, there are still opportunities to make the way data and tools are used offshore more integrated and more efficient. My capstone project grows directly out of these experiences. I'm proposing a route-focused management system or application called the Undersea Cable Offshore Management System, or ECOMS for short. And the goal is not to repair a broken process, but to refine a workflow so that offshore teams can work more efficiently with clear awareness along these cable routes and stronger records post-mission. Here we see a generalized map from a source called Telegeography that shows current active submarine cable systems around the world. Uh, each colored line represents an in-service system on the seafloor, and the dots and circles at the end of the lines represent a landing. What it doesn't show is out-of-service old coax cables or future proposed systems, which there'd be a lot more lines if it was showing the future systems on here. So this is a picture of the live backbone, the live network in use today. Again, very generalized. Undersea cables are largely invisible to most people, but they are fundamental to how the world connects. Industry research estimates that more than 95% of all international data traffic, whether email, streaming, financial transactions, move through these fiber optic lines. It's easy to picture the cloud as satellites, digital cloud, but satellites actually carry only a small fraction of this traffic because of the bandwidth limits and higher latency. They cannot handle the modern high bandwidth demand at the same scale that fiber can. For this job, you really need the capacity and speed of these fiber optic systems. Laying and maintaining these systems is both expensive and time sensitive. The vessels that install these and repair these cables are extremely costly to run, currently in the ballpark of $125,000 to $150,000 a day. So every extra hour on station, can mean tens of thousands of dollars in additional costs. So the stakes are high, right? Damage to these cables can affect not only internet access, but also global finance, communications, and as demand grows, lots of geopolitical risk increase. Currently, maintaining the reliability of this network is extremely important. The offshore problem. So I kind of want to give a sense of what crews are currently dealing with based on my experience in the projects I've worked on. And just a quick note in the lower left, that's a diagram of one of the cable ships that I do work on. You can see in the middle there, it holds the cable tanks. Behind the cable tanks is the lay equipment, all the specialized cable equipment, and all the separate systems that the crews rely on during cable installations or repairs. So one of the big problems that I've experienced is the lack of real-time updates. It's common to preload all the critical mission data before leaving port. So the cable route positions, the seabed surveys, installation plans, once offshore, internet access often drops back to satellite speeds and oftentimes unstable, especially depending on weather and environmental conditions. So when situations do change unexpectedly, as they oftentimes do in the maritime industry, the data on board quickly needs refresh. The data is also split across multiple systems and spaces throughout the vessel. This is the big driver of my capstone. In my experience, the route and engineering data live in one GIS environment, live vessel traffic, live weather in another, and then the vessel statistics, the cable handling equipment statistics, and separate tools altogether. So to get a full picture during operations, these cable engineers, they move between different workstations and displays. That kind of context switching takes time, and it does make it easier to miss, important factors. And at the same time, the environment is always changing out in the open ocean, wind, waves, currents, and also nearby vessel behavior can all shift during jobs. And without integrated views, it's hard to keep that tied back to the cable route. And like I mentioned before, network connectivity is another limitation. So true offline functionality is essential because syncing large files, pulling maps can be difficult in poor weather or thick cloud cover with limited satellite connections. Crews are working with whatever data they loaded at the start, even if sometimes conditions change unexpectedly. And all this has real cost implications. slow decisions, minor delays, they just don't hurt productivity. But on the types of vessels, these specialized vessels I work on, every extra day offshore, like I mentioned before, could be upwards of $125,000 in additional costs. So these are the problems that led me to propose UCOMS as a route-focused system design, aiming to bring these separated data sources and workstations into a more integrated, offline capable workflow for these cable crews on these undersea projects. And then here's some key terms, before we move forward, just to clarify, you'll hear me say RPL, which is the route position list. It's basically the core spatial data set for undersea cable design and engineering. It's a series of latitude, longitudinal points that define the exact path of the cable. Alongside these coordinates, the RPL includes cable specific information, such as cable type. Um, there's different armors for different types of seabed, heavier armor for more fished areas, more seismic active areas, etc. Water depth information and basically installation details, what vessel did delay, times and dates, etc. It basically functions as the main reference for any event or observation tied to the operation. Next, KP, which stands for the kilometer post, kilometer point. These are distance markers placed along the cable route, usually at set intervals. We like to use 500 meters or every kilometer. KP values give basically a precise way to locate features along the line, along the route, events or issues along the cable supporting navigation and reporting. And then AIS, probably more familiar than the other two. AIS is a mandatory real-time transmission about, or I guess, what vessels in the area, including identity positions and the context of UCOMS. AIS helps um, crews maintain maritime awareness, provide critical alerts about nearby ship movements, in the work area or along the cable corridor. So knowing these three terms throughout this presentation, quite essential for following how the project works. Okay, so now that you've heard a bit about the problems and the solutions that I've experienced, quick summary on what I'm trying to achieve with UCOMS. One piece is giving crews a single operating picture that is aligned to the route position list or the RPL. Notes, alerts, events, all tied to a specific kilometer point in time. So everybody's looking at the same route-centric view instead of jumping from separate systems. Another focus of UCOMS is to speed up decision making. Simple alerts, automation, short-term forecasts are there to highlight what needs attention. The crews can spend less time hunting for the information, instead get notifications if a vessel is approaching the cable corridor, all in a singular view. UCOMS is also designed to automate corridor tasks like cable crossing records. There are rules for laying a cable on existing cables. Maybe not rules, but good practices. In basic cable corridor monitoring, some entries can be pre-filled, standard steps are likely to be missed, and the log becomes basically validation instead of manual chore. Another element for UCOMS to produce complete audit ready as installed, meaning how the cable is installed, exports at the other jobs, route attributes, crossings, incidents, indicators, weather, time, everything, can be exported, tied to the KP, tied to the cable, and then handed over to the clients, customers as a deliverable. Another requirement of UCOMS is that it works reliably offline, running on local data packages during operations, using small cloud-backed syncs, when a link is available. We're been migrating towards Starlink, so that has been beneficial. Again, when the when conditions are good for that connection. And finally, design is meant to improve usability over time through input from crews and stakeholders. The layout and workflows that I'm showing here during this presentation are based on survey feedback. Being in an industry, I do have the blessing of being able to talk to the crews and part of this Capstone was coming up with a survey, and during the off season in the office, I was able to, talk to different people that go out often and kind of figure out what they would like to see. So building on a proven need through existing research, literature is very clear that the main risks to undersea cables are predictable when you have the right spatial information. For example, one article or one journal showed that damage is often linked to known human activities, such as fishing, anchors, just carelessness, and that current charts and shared spatial data go a long way toward reducing those risks. Another journal highlighted environmental hotspots, especially on landings near continental shelves where seismic conditions and hazards cluster. That just kind of reinforces the idea that that EUCOMS needs a good understanding of where these hotspots are along the route. You can preload them, you can update them. If earthquakes happen while you're out there, then you can sync that up and have new, fresh data. Other work makes strong cases that integration beats any single tool. One journal emphasized using authoritative data sets, keeping them versioned, bringing them together in consistent ways, rather than relying on isolated applications, which fell right in line with what I'm trying to do here. And then the need for integrated, route-aware information is well supported in the research that I gather throughout this course. When I see in my own offshore experiences that the data does exist, but they are spread across separate systems, as I mentioned before. Navigational equipment is separated from the cable engineering and modeling environments, and the weather and live data is separated once again. And all of those are driven by geospatial data in some form or another. But again, they're not presented as a single operating picture tied to the actual cable itself or the KP. So UCOMS is my proposed design to respond to that gap. Takes ideas from existing research about data integration, authoritative sources, spatial contexts, and organizes them into a route-centric operating environment. That is built from my experiences in how offshore teams actually work. So the methodology. Brief summary of the methodology. First piece is core principle there in orange. I treat the route position list or the RPL as the single source of truth for UCOMS. It's a digital backbone of the operation. It defines the cable path kilometer by kilometer, and everything else is organized around those KPs, that RPL. The second piece is data alignment. In the middle there in green, every other data set is tied back to specific kilometer point on the RPL. That includes weather samples, AIS vessel positions, and known hazards. The idea is that nothing sits off on its own. Every note or reading knows exactly where it belongs along the cable route. The third piece down there at the bottom, intelligent monitoring, shown in blue. Once everything is aligned to the route, UCOMS can watch the corridor automatically. Corridor meaning like a buffer around the actual cable line. It's not about, it's not just about safety, but the concept is to monitor vessel activity and other key events near the cable, trigger alerts when something needs attention, and at the same time create structured logs tied back to the KP, the kilometer point, and time. That way, anything that happens along the operation is both visible in the moment and captured for the final record or deliverable. And this approach shifts the crew away from constant manual map watching and toward route-based alerts that can support faster, more focused situational awareness along the cable route. Quick summary on data. We have a lot of proprietary data. This is the stuff that gets preloaded before the ship leaves port. This is the core of the system, the core data that the customer holds closest. It's usually the route position list and the detailed survey data that maps the seabed conditions along the proposed route, along with cable attributes, cable type, etc. This information is extremely specific to a particular project and particular cable system. I think of it as the kind of the static blueprint that the whole operation is built on. Um, Next is the license and open data that provide essential context. This includes navigational charts, global cable databases, governmental data sets from NOAA, BOEM. They have REX, navigational hazard restricted areas, etc. And then the live feeds, as I mentioned, AIS vessel traffic and weather. And during operations, the actually during repair operations, we can use the AIS historical data to kind of track vessels and see how maybe they broke a cable if they're dragging an anchor, which direction they were dragging, etc. So the value of VCOMS is that it doesn't treat these as separate worlds. It fuses the RPL, the blueprints with the contextual backgrounds and live updates into one route-centered view, which supports better awareness offshore and stronger records after the job, faster decision making. So here's some wireframe designs I came up with, kind of what it could look like as a deployable application. The wireframe, it kind of shows the dashboard. It's not a random layout, it's conceptual based on feedback from the surveys I did with offshore personnel. Basically, after you log in, you have a navigational menu, hub for the system. You can see the different panes that you can scroll to. The map view is built around the route position list with AIS traffic context layers, so the engineers can see the cable route and also the live data on top. The cable tanks, if you remember the picture at the beginning of the presentation, it shows the cable sats in the tank, remaining cable, kind of keep you on track as you're laying the cable. Cable statistics provides simple table of key metrics like tensions and payouts, everything you want to pay attention to as the cable is on the seafloor, and you're tied to it on the vessel. In camera views, the ships are loaded with cameras from the different workshops, so you can kind of get an idea, um, you know, how the cable is being spliced. You can see the cable on the deck coming up out of the ocean, etc. So each screen focuses on a single task, and the design is meant to stay clean, easy to read, so crews can move between these views quickly, and understand what they're looking at during these busy operations. So expected outcomes, just kind of a clear improvement in the operational efficiency from the workflows that I've experienced by automating some of these tasks like event logging and pulling information into a single organized view. UCOMS cuts down on manual data management. In my experience, this is where a lot of time is lost. The goal is to give that time back to the crews and to the vessels and to the project so they can focus on reacting to changes offshore, keeping the operations on schedule, which again is costly. UCOMS is designed so that every node or event is tied to a specific point along the cable. At the end of the job, the system can generate as installed exports that pull together all these incidents, crossings, weather samples, indicators, route changes, all tied to a point along the cable route. And enhanced awareness by centering everything on the route, on the RPL. Everybody shares the same information in a single view, so that shared view supports better decisions about where to focus attention, when to pause, how to manage interactions with other vessels. Um, and I expect this to add value and reduce risk on the cable operations that I am familiar with. Conclusion to wrap up, just connects back to some of my own experiences on the vessels and projects that I've worked on. Again, just my experience, cable operations still rely on separated systems, even though day rates are extremely high. That said, it makes it easy to lose time by pulling all this information together, and harder to keep a clear picture, and easier to miss things. And with this capstone, I set out to design UCOMS as a route-focused system that connects those pieces. This design, brings together data that already exists. It ties notes and events to a specific kilometer point, that KP again, along the route, and organizes the view around. And the goal is to not replace the tools, but to link them in a way that better supports the crews who are actually doing the work. And in my view, this offers a practical way to reduce time spent managing data, support quicker decisions, more confident decisions offshore, and leave behind a stronger auditable record or deliverable for the customer. Um, I think that's all I have. So thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thanks, Graham. If we have time for maybe one question. Well, we're running a little bit tight on time here, Graham. So if you could put your email in the chat, and then if someone wants to follow up with you, they can.
Yes, sir. I appreciate
That
it.
that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then if you can stop sharing, we'll get Ben to go ahead and share. And Ben, if you're there, if you can start sharing your screen, we'll get you going.
Can you see that okay?
It's where there we go. Yep, we can hear you. So whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Perfect. So thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Levine. I work as a solution engineer manager for a street level imagery company called Cyclomedia. One of our primary customers are property tax assessors. So my project is utilizing FME to orient street level imagery for tax assessors. So I'll get into a little bit of why this is important here with my introduction. So the purpose of this capstone presentation is to create a feature manipulation engine workbench, or FME, which is how I'll refer to it for the remainder of the presentation. That basically helps local government tax assessors orient street level imagery toward building fronts. So building fronts are an important vantage point for assessors because it allows them to quickly determine property condition and classification. And if properties can be quickly appraised with street level imagery, especially for municipalities that have thousands and sometimes millions of images, then this is going to really help promote efficiency and encourage tax assessors to continue to adopt technology. So right now, this has traditionally been done through aerial imagery. A lot of us are familiar with Esri's imagery base map, but most of the aerial providers have a little bit higher quality resolution, like EagleView, Nearmap, Vexcel. Aerial imagery allows users to see the entire property, including backyards, building footprints, roadways, but they don't show a lot of detail about the front or the sides of the properties, which includes windows, doors, and what's known as grade and condition. And that's where street level imagery has really come in over the past decade as a viable tool to supplement that aerial imagery. So aerial imagery continues to be the industry standards, but again, street level imagery is really becoming an important tool. There is a lot of guidelines that's been set forth by the International Association of Assessing Officers, or IAAO. They are the primary nationwide organization for standards for tax assessors, and they've actually written some guidelines for not just aerial imagery, but street level imagery as well. Most commercially available street level imagery has been captured with mid-size SUVs like the one that you see here. Those images have specific coordinates, X, Y, and Z. And again, with this example here with Cyclomedia, you can actually see the camera on the top with the roof racks. There are some challenges with street level imagery, though, specifically for tax assessors. One of the biggest challenges is looking at the default view of a property. So oftentimes the parcel centroid or the building centroid is being passed. So those coordinates are passed through an API, and then it brings up the closest image to that property or that centroid. But in the case like the one I'm showing here, that can often be the side or the back of a property and doesn't necessarily show that initial front, which is a really important part of the efficiency process. Ideally, we would have that front-facing view because assessors are taking screenshots of those properties for property cards, which they use for protests. If anyone's ever gone through that process with their local government, and this might seem trivial, especially when you have all of the image recordings available to you. You can simply kind of click around. But again, if you think about doing this for thousands and thousands of properties, that can get pretty old. And again, just to promote efficiency and get things done a little bit quicker, that's really the purpose of this project. So the project goals is to create that process that ingests local government GIS data and then creates that most likely front-facing view. And I want to use FME to do that, to give an output that is scalable for all the properties in a jurisdiction. So some prior research on this, as far as local government efficiency goes, as I mentioned before, aerial imagery is typically the one of the ways that tax assessors utilize GIS and remote sensing. And studies have shown that they actually assess 5% more properties at a 12% greater accuracy. And street level imagery is just going to work to continue to increase those percentages. Tax assessors typically use what's known as a CAMA system, which stands for Computer Aided Mass Appraisal. They use those to log all the information related to the property, its address, its parcel identifier, the dimensions of the property. Is there a shed, a pool? Basically, any of the attributes that are going to be determining the value of the property. And the IAAO has consistently set forth the guidelines that show CAMA systems are very important, and street level imagery can be imported into those CAMA systems just like aerial imagery. And tax courts have consistently maintained that CAMA systems are legal to use when estimating a property's market value. Studies have also shown that GIS plays a major role in property valuation. So again, with that CAMA and remote sensing, and then remote sensing data also helps with property forecasting. So not just the current property value, but also what it could be in the future. When I get into the research here of more of the technical side, orienting street level imagery is really the most important thing here. And this is something that can be accomplished and has been researched pretty thoroughly. So the three essentially image parameters that go into a street level imagery positioning is the yaw, pitch, and horizontal field of view. So what I'm showing here is just a demonstration for yaw. So that would be if we think about the circle that we're looking at on the screen here, if an image is pointing directly north, then it would be 0. If it's directly east, it would be 90, south 180, west 270. So that is really what's determining on a 360-degree plane where that camera is pointing. The pitch determines the tilt of the image. So for example, if we wanted to look at the taller like skyscrapers in the background of the image, you would want a higher pitch so that you were tilting upward with that image. And then if you wanted to look at maybe like the cobblestone streets there, you would have a much lower pitch, with 0 essentially being that transverse line there in the yellow dot, which would just be essentially straight ahead. And then the final parameter is horizontal field of view, which determines the zoom level. So in this case, if you look at the blue triangle on the left side of the screenshot here, this is zoomed out, so you have more of an obtuse angle. If you think about the angle of that triangle where it meets the recording point or the image location. And then if we were to zoom in, you can see how that angle gets a lot more acute. So that really determines the horizontal field of view. So FME is the platform that I chose to do this project because it is a really useful ETL and GIS processing tool. It's actually directly linked to ArcGIS Pro now. If any of you have used the data interoperability extension, FME is actually has replaced the data interoperability extension that's made by Safe Software. This is just a screenshot of an example where you can really link together a lot of different processes and tools, some of which are tabular in nature. Some of them are for calculations, and others are spatial, such as neighbor finders and just looking at the proximity. And they can also output any of the endings of these workbenches as shapefiles, feature classes, or CSVs and Microsoft Excel files, like I will show later on here. But the gap in the research that I found is the positioning of street level imagery specifically for tax assessors. Again, they have to have that initial front-facing view of the property address to increase their efficiency. So that was really the main purpose of this project. Again, was to create that FME workbench that can do this at scale. So the data that I needed for this project included a lot of local government GIS data. I used Web Central Appraisal District, which is where Laredo, Texas is located, as the example project here. They are a customer of ours, so I wanted to use this as a test use case. A lot of the data that they included is very common amongst local government assessors. So we can see here parcels, building footprints, and street center lines. And then the street image locations, we have these as tabular, but I just use the XY to point tool to make those available as geolocated points along the streets. And then the final data source I needed was the street level imagery. So street level imagery is provided by Cyclomedia in this case, and this is not to deliver the imagery, but simply to run tests, the outputs of this workbench to make sure that indeed the fronts are being viewed. And then, of course, the hardware and software, as I mentioned, ArcGIS Pro, FME, and StreetSmart were used for this. So for the methodology, I took the GIS data provided by local governments. This may not come as a surprise, but local government data does not typically have uniform attribution. So first I investigated to make sure that the important columns and attributes like the parcel name, the address information, land use code, and street names were included. For my data set, it did not have land use codes, which did cause some problems I'll get into a little bit later. And then you can see again the street level image locations that were not natively in GIS format, but easily put there with XY to point in ArcGIS Pro as those points along the road. So some of the spatial relationship challenges I had, what I really needed to do was take the parcel information and attach it to the building footprints, because ultimately the building footprints are what we want to point at, not the entire parcel. But parcel data tends to have all of that really important attribution like the ID, its land use code, and some of the important attribution that tax assessors are looking at. I thought that a spatial join would be an easy way to do this, but found that that wasn't the case. On the case of the left side here, we have townhomes or condos. In those cases, you have one building footprint, but you may have anywhere from 2 to 20 different units. So in this case, we really want to point at the correct unit. So I had to split those building footprints to make sure that they were being essentially associated to the correct parcel. But of course, when you're looking to split those things along lines, which there are tools within FME that can do that, you run into the case on the right here where some buildings that are straddling more than one parcel also get split. So I had to account for that in my FME processing. There were also some spatial relationship challenges where there were no building footprints, which is often due to a data vintage issue. And then this is just an example again of the FME workbench here, just a very small section of it where I'm comparing the street name in the parcel to the nearest center line. So essentially what I wanted to do was not just take the closest recording point or image location, but take the closest one that fell on the same street that matched the parcel address as a way to really get that front of the building. This was easier said than done, especially when you have a lot of really interesting parcels. They come in all different shapes and sizes. So if they were obstructed for any reason, or if they just simply didn't have street level imagery, especially in very rural areas, I wanted to tag these as no image to avoid any confusion. Really the worst thing that I could do would be provide a customer with an image that says that this was a property. In reality, it is not the correct property. So the final delivery was really 3 different feature classes. One was a GIS feature class of the vision lines, which I will show briefly here. A GIS feature class of all the parcels that were classed as no image, and then a CSV with tabular information of all the properties so that they could be input into an API. And this is an example of just an excerpt of that CSV here. So you can see the most important part here is that URL, which essentially points them towards that location in the street level imagery. To review the results, I did 2 different processes. The first was just a GIS review. And just some statistics with the project. The high number of images that were too far away from a street level image, so that's 8,939, that was expected because Webb County, Texas is very rural with the exception of Laredo, Texas. But what I really wanted to bring attention to was in the screenshot here, those green lines that go from the street level location to the building centroids. Those are the vision lines that I wanted to test. And as you can see here, at least in the GIS review, the residential properties tended to fare very well. They were pointing at the fronts of the properties, and that was the intended use here and output. What was also important is these are 2 examples here where the corner lots, similar to that example I showed at the beginning of the presentation, were successfully altered due to that matching street name. So because they had Galveston Street as the street name, it was able to match up with the street, Galveston Street, that was provided in the street center lines. There were some cases where the street match did have some unintended negative effects. So in this case, Burgundy Loop and Burgundy Drive, they kind of change at not quite the right spot in the customer data. So you can see those two vision lines are pointing really far away because they were labeled as Burgundy Loop, but realistically, Burgundy Loop needed to be extended a little bit further in the customer's data. And then the lack of land use codes did provide a challenge. In this case, we're looking at a right-of-way parcel where that red street center line is going through. This did cause some problems. And in fact, the parcel shown here with those vision lines just to the west, those would be looking at the backs of the properties. And then finally here with the results for the image sampling, I took 100 randomly chosen just through a random number generator in Microsoft Excel, just to look and see how the results actually fared within the API. And again, residential properties did fare very well. Although there were some cases like this where the desired view was actually given, but an obstruction in the image was still present, like this truck I found pretty amusing. But these examples were still considered correct because there's no way to anticipate those obstructions, which could also be vegetation or even an Amazon truck that was just happened to be in front of the property. At the other end of this truck is still the front-facing view of this property. One thing I did need to define, though, which I didn't expect to, was the parameters for commercial and vacant properties. So in the case of commercial properties, like the one on the left here, this is a really large warehouse. This is really common for industrial areas as well. Obviously, we're not going to be able to drive through that gate up to the property. So, is this considered an appropriate image as this is as close as we could get, and it is still imaging the property. So I did consider that a success, as well as areas that are growing really rapidly, especially in Texas. There are lots that have been cleared but haven't been built yet. So as long as it was pointing towards where a building would have been built, then that was also considered successful. But not all properties were successful. So of the 100 sampled, 91 returned an image that was considered successful. So that left 9 that did not. And some of the common reasons for that, similar to that right-of-way parcel that I showed, where the data was either obstructed or in this case looking at the back of the property as opposed to the front as intended. So in conclusion, the residential results were the strongest, but there's a lot of improvements that would require corrected local government data, which again is kind of hard to come by. Land use codes would be very useful. Building height information would be very useful, especially for dynamic urban environments. I basically made the pitch just straight ahead because Webb County has very few buildings above 2 stories. So again, a more dynamic urban environment would require building height information to make that pitch more flexible. And then street name misspelling corrections was kind of an issue. There'd be times where if I had 10 Main Street spelled M-A-I-N, then next door was 12 Main Street, M-A-I-N-E. So just kind of coming up with some of those misspelling corrections through fuzzy matching, I think would be a really good way to improve this model. But realistically, testing and feedback directly from customers would be the best way to really improve this, to get their feedback, make sure it's being more efficient, and to really to correct and further, just further change the model to fit their needs. I just included my references, and I appreciate everybody listening, and looking forward to some questions.
All right, Ben, thanks a lot. See if you have a question or two. It looks like there's a question in the chat window for you.
Is the street level orientation, northeast, south, and west, an automatic measurement within the car or camera system, or does that need to be verified by the analyst? That is a good question. So essentially, with the panoramic image, it is a 360-degree image. So in order to orient that imagery in terms of the yaw, which determines that north, south, east, and west, it does need to be determined by the analyst. So this can be done automatically in some respects. So at least for our API, assets is another use case. So not just tax assessment, but also like public works, for example. So if I were to pass the coordinates of a fire hydrant or a pavement marking, or even the front door of a property, it will find the closest recording point and automatically point in that direction, regardless of where it falls on that 360-degree plane. But again, since I was starting from scratch with this and trying to define those at scale as opposed to relying on that automated version, that's kind of why that needed to be defined. I hope that makes sense. How sensitive is this approach to properties that are built on an upslope or downslope? Just thinking about other communities where the topography might be a lot more variable in that regard. Do you come across any issues with houses that were too high or low to be accurately measured? That's another great question, and that would be an improvement to the model. In the case of Webb County, it's incredibly flat, very little terrain, at least within Laredo, Texas. Once you get outside of it towards the border, there's a little bit more, but I didn't run any problems in my particular project. However, I could see that being a problem. If I think to hillier areas, even a lot of places in the West Coast, in Northern California, Oregon, Washington, that would definitely be a consideration. I think in those cases, we would have to consider not just the centroid of the parcel or the building footprint, but also its Z value as well. And I think that that could be used to define that pitch.
All right, Ben, thanks again for a great presentation. If you could put your contact info in the chat window, so if
Will do.
anyone
Thank you.
wants to follow up with you, they can. And then, Zach, if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen, we'll get you rolling.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool.
And we see your presentation, so whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Okay. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to my presentation. My name is Zach Nelson, and the main topic of this presentation is going to be information extraction. Mainly, we're going to be uh, trying to extract events described in online media. I'll be scraping this text from the web, from various news sites, and I will be trying to build some geospatial data from these events, specifically by employing a pipeline of a variety of large language models. These models are domain specific and free and open source. Um, Namely, I'll be using some named entity recognition to tag locations, persons, and organizations associated with these events within the text. I'll be using some text generation to create unique summaries for each chunk of article text. And I'll be classifying these chunks with some tags, whether these events are related to military activity or diplomatic meetings or what have you. And finally, I'll be using a sentence transformer. This is not a language model in the sense that the others are. This is, well, they're all sentence embedding models, but anyway, so let's get started. So a quick introduction. Here's a little bit of information about myself, link to my LinkedIn profile. I've been interning with the PUG, working on various projects for the past couple of years. The PUG is an online or a consortium of geospatial professionals, and we meet every now and then and discuss ways to enhance our data atlas and projects that we can team up on and work on. But anyway, let's get started with the content. So my project objectives and goal. The first objective is to produce a GeoJSON file of point features constructed from these events in news article text. I'll be applying precision, recall, and F1 scores to measure the reliability of this process. And I'll be displaying this on a map, these point features. So the goal is to create or to automate this process and of extracting information from article text and make it so that it's repeatable and can be used on, you know, several different forms of online content. So previous research, some of the topics that are pertinent to this project. Most of these studies, and this relates to this project as well, use precision recall and F1 scores to measure the reliability of these language models. Recall, or the difference between recall and precision is recall has values that are false positive. Precision has values that are, I'm sorry, precision has values that are false positive. Recall has values that are false negative. Basically, if you have an annotated list of, say, locations, anything that gets returned by the model that does not appear in that list would be counted as a false positive, which would affect your precision score. Um, anything that does not get returned and by the model that is present in your annotated list of, say, locations, um, affects your recall. So we'll be seeing that later on in the presentation. There's been some studies done on how fine-tuning language models affect their performance. Specifically this one, the Zabala-Lopez study. But they found that fine-tuning their model on a very niche data set, I think containing tags for military-related vehicles and other things like that, help the model identify those entities in text. There's studies done on herds. Typically, I think if you add too many bells and whistles to a system, it degrades performance. But and finally, we have sentence transformers. So language models, they don't read the actual text. The text is tokenized first, and then it's embedded in a numerical vector representation of the text. And this is actually what the language models read. But all of this stuff is pertinent to this project. So for our data, we'll be employing this CONL3 data set, which tags things on locations, organizations, miscellaneous, and persons. This classification data set, which tags are entailment, contradiction, and neutral. We'll be using text generation trained on this refined web data set. So the refined web data set is kind of a subset of this common crawl data set, which scrapes the web, billions of web pages for content. There's a lot of duplications in this common crawl data set and spam that has been removed by the refined web data set. But and we'll also be using a sentence transformer, which was trained on these three data sets that you see here. The first two are question and answer data sets that assist the model in understanding semantic relationships. And the third one is the Stanford Natural Language Inference data set that basically teaches the model what, or through a premise sentence and hypothesis sentence, statements that agree with, contradict, or are neutral to the premise. And I have a little example of that right here. Anyway, so let me remove, I guess. It's tough to see my slide, but so this is the methodology. This is what I used in my pipeline. So I'll be using this for summarization. But essentially, before we get into the articles, I'll be using Google custom search engine to search for specific URLs where this article content can be found. And then I'll be using Beautiful Soup to access the HTML of the web page. And I'll be specifically getting the text within the p tags of the page HTML. This gets tokenized into chunks. Each chunk is 150 tokens and passed to named entity recognition first. And this is the output that you get from that. So you get some location names, some names of individuals that are associated with the event, some names of organizations, and this, along with the context, uh, gets passed into the first step of text generation, which produces a summary using the named entities from the NER. And this then gets passed into a sentence transformer, so we can remove duplicate summaries. A lot of times these articles tend to start off describing an event, and in the ensuing paragraphs, they sort of elaborate on these events with more fine details. But then this gets passed into the classification model, which tags these unique summaries in terms of what type of event they are. For example, they'll get tagged as a military activity or a diplomatic meeting or a natural disaster, something like that. This then gets passed into the second step of text generation, which is meant to extract the location names from these unique summaries. Then this gets passed to, in this case, we're using GeoPy. I kind of ran out of time to implement named entity linking. There were some problems with that we can get into later on, I guess. But after that, we have our fully constructed GeoJSON point feature, and then we can apply that to a map. But I just wanted to quickly go over the text generation steps 1 and 2. But as you can see, I have my prompt here. These are 150 token length chunks of text. As you can see here, there's 11 chunks in this particular article. The last couple of chunks are related news headlines and things like that that aren't actually part of the article content. So I didn't include those in the analysis. We'll get to that later, but you can see what gets returned by the named entity linking first here. And then for this particular article chunk, it's writing this one sentence summary using the named entities from NER in the summary. So we have US strikes targeting nuclear facilities in Iran targeted, excuse me, nuclear sites, nuclear facilities in Iran, including the sites Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan, intensified regional tensions and delayed Tehran's nuclear weapons development. So that's a typical or chunk summary that you'll get from these things. And what we're trying to do is extract this information right here. This is where the event happened, and we're trying to map the event. So this is the second step of text generation that we're applying right here. We have our unique summary, and again, we're passing in the list of locations tagged by the NER model. And as you can see, the second step of text generation extracted these locations. This is an example of a false positive right here. This cites these locations are technically correct. The most ideal scenario in this case would be to return Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow, since those were the actual sites of the U.S. strikes on these nuclear facilities. Real quick, a little word about sentence transformers. So, like I said, like text is not passed directly into these language models. It's first tokenized, and then it's embedded in these vector or numeric vector representations of the text. And this is actually what the model reads. So if in this example, you have a research paper about computer hardware, you frequently get words like GPU, CPU, or acronyms like this, RAM. And all of these point in the same relative semantic direction. So when you compute the cosine similarity, for example, of GPU and CPU, you get the dot product of the two vectors up here and the Euclidean length down here of the two vectors. And this gives you a value between -1 and 1. 1 being the two passages or words are very closely semantically related. For example, if this research paper suddenly started talking about clothes, blue shirts or red shorts or white socks, things of that nature, those words or phrases would be in a radically different or pointed in a different semantic direction, meaning that the two topics, the two passages or words are unrelated. So this is directly related to us trying to extract unique events and not map every single event mentioned in the article text. So here's some results. I did adopt a standard of scoring all of these results. So for persons, I only annotated names of individuals that were mentioned in the article text. For locations, I annotated geographic locations only, such as countries, states, provinces, cities, or natural features. For organizations, I included institutions, governments, companies, structured entities like that. But as you can see here, we have some results, and I think text generation, or for this, the results table for this one was done for one chunk of article text. But you can see the precision, recall, and F1 scores associated with this chunk of article text. But here we have some examples. So you can see how for the second step of text generation right here, it only returned Iran, and which drastically impacted our recall. So this table was done for an entire article, meaning every single chunk. So we have our expected number of locations, persons, organizations, and our predicted number right here. This was returned by the model. And I can't, there's something in the way of the F1 scores. I don't know if y'all can see the F1 scores for this one, but let's move on to general results. So I ran the script on 3 different articles 10 times to compile these general results that you see right here. You have your expected annotated locations, persons, organizations, or what have you right here. So correct locations on a per unique event basis. So each one of these articles probably had anywhere from 7 to 9 chunks of text. And you can see what the model predicts right here, what gets returned. And I can see my precision score. I can't see my recall or my F1 score. But anyway, so this was the map that was returned. Bear in mind with this map, so we have Isfahan, Fordo, and Natanz, I think, is up here. But these were not the actual sites of the strikes. If we had been able to implement named entity linking, this would have gone into a Wikidata knowledge base where Isfahan City and the Isfahan nuclear site have separate QIDs. And based on the context of the unique summary, it could have chosen the correct QID, which is the actual nuclear site and not the city. So the nuclear sites are very nearby to these point features that you see right here. So for future work and considerations, the first thing I'd like to do is complete the implementation of named entity linking. I'd like to experiment with some other language models. I did get a chance to experiment with Olama for text generation, and unfortunately, the script took about, or the execution time was about 8 hours. Uh, so not very practical. To compare to the execution time using the models that I used for this project, it was about 7 minutes for each execution. But anyway, so I would like to create a Unity application showcasing all of these events that have been compiled from these news articles, um, and maybe investigate some ways in which I can get some polygon and polyline features in there as well, and investigate the cost of deploying all this and having it fully automated on the cloud Amazon Web Service. So here's a list of my references, and that's about all I have.
Thanks a lot, Zach.
Thanks, appreciate it.
While we wait for a question to show up, I have a question of my own. So you've worked here with text. What kind of extension would there be to work with voice or audio in kind of the same scenario of
So, yeah,
extracting, spatial
that's a good
information?
question. Um, there's image-based language models that where you can input like an image, say like there's a map in one of these news articles where it can read this image and gather the point features, um, or I guess compile a list of events from the point features in the map that's included in the article. Um, I haven't investigated that too much because I was so focused on this, but that would definitely be something to consider trying to implement in this pipeline.
All right. Thanks.
No problem. Any other, me
It looks like you have a question.
chat. Okay, let me scroll down. Very interesting stuff, Zach. Did you come across any issues with place names that were hard to disambiguate? Yeah. So in one example, I suppose there was a missile strike on the city of Dnipro in Ukraine, and most of the stuff is directly related to named entity linking. Um, that would normally be used to disambiguate location names. But in this example, there was a missile strike on the city of Dnipro in Ukraine, and the point feature, since I'm using GeoPy instead of named entity linking, was mapped to the Dnipro River instead of the actual city name. So uh, yeah, that's why implementing something like named entity linking next is so important. But that's a very good question. Thank you. So I worked on projects that use Stanford NLP plus other methods for extracting place names from events and news articles in the 2010s. At the time, there were some efforts to create gold standard datasets to test against. I found a recent effort to create one here might be useful. Okay, thank you. Much appreciated.
All right. With that, if you want to stop sharing your screen
Sure.
and put your contact info in the chat in case someone wants to follow up afterwards. Great job again.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, then Shazan, I think you're up next. So if you want to start sharing your screen, we'll get everything tested and you can take it from there.
Hi, good night, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you and your presentation looks good.
Okay, well, good night, everyone. My name is Shazan Tuckett. I'm from the Twin Island Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, and during my time doing the MGIS, I think where I'm from has influenced a lot of what I've done, what I've chosen as fundamental projects, and it's no different here. My capstone project is titled Towards the National Addressing Framework for St. Kitts and Nevis, improving land management, governance and service delivery. One of the considerations is that St. Kitts does not have a standardized island-wide addressing system, and it's understood that addresses underpin governance, not just mail delivery. And one of the things that is clearly evident is that the lack of the addressing system affects how we're able to connect land, people, and services. This project really is going to look at the problem as well as the GIS methodology, some pilot results that I would have done for some pilot areas, the relevance for governance, and the path towards a potential national rollout. In think it's one of the issues that I've found is that addresses, as we know them currently, they're often described using landmarks or family names or local knowledge that the individuals might have. There's no consistent house numbering or standardized street logic used island wide. Over time, there have been some very, very small pocket projects that have been done, or something that you found is that people often use their parcel ID as their address, but that's not consistent. It's also not consistent between the different databases that the utilities hold within the country and our emergency services. Um, and that's something that I'm hoping to remedy. The emergency services struggle a lot with precise location identification. And this also affects effective planning, taxation, and service delivery on a whole. There needs to be some formality that's brought to it because we understand that addresses foundational infrastructure. So my capstone had three main research objectives. One, to design a prototype national addressing framework. It needed to be suitable to a small island scale and be able to tie into the existing governance and administrative structure. My objective two, I wanted to use ArcGIS Pro to link the parcels, buildings, roads, and the rest of the data sets that I will explain a little bit further, to generate address numbers and to create spatially accurate address points. My third objective was really to evaluate the inclusiveness across settlement types and evaluate the relevance for governance and service delivery. The idea was that this needed to be an applied GIS project that really focused on implementation and not just like conceptual design. For my literature review, the international consensus really is that effective addressing really needs to be unique, consistent, scalable, and user-friendly. The addresses truly, one of the things that you found in the research is that the consistent wording is that it acts as glue. So it links the cadastre, it links demographic data, it links services and institutions. And I looked at three global examples: Ghana, which integrated there with national IDs; Trinidad and Tobago had some postal code modernization; and Liberia did some digital addressing for logistics and healthcare, I think using SNU code. So there's an identified gap in small island states really having these structured addressing systems, and the project seeks to really localize international best practice and test it in a small island developing state environment. So I would have looked at two study areas. Within the country, I would have looked at Newton Ground, which was a rural village. relatively low density, had a simple road network and traditional settlement pattern. One of the things that I also wanted to look at was Newton Gone also had a lot of informal settlement. So there are cases where they're not established registered parcels, but people have been squatting for extended period of time because realistically, development in St. Kitts has happened in such a way where a lot of it has been based off of colonialism, and a lot of the communities are built from originally the slave plantations that started at a point and originally radiated outwards, where communities were developed in pockets. Over time, there was some standardized development that were then added on to those existing developments, but those people were never formalized with title, with any parcel IDs. I also looked at camps and Limekeel, which exist within the central business district of Bastia. Uh, I looked at it because it's relatively urban, peri-urban. There's mixed residential and commercial uses in some areas. There are some irregularly shaped parcels, and there's a higher address density. One of the reasons why I wanted to look at these two differing things is that it tests whether one framework would be able to work for the entire island and whether or not there's a need to avoid designing a system that only fits like one context. All the data sets that I would have used for this entire project are authoritative government sources, are from authoritative government sources. I would have used the cadastral parcels, which were the legal land units, the road center lines, and the edges of the pavement. They would have formed the backbone of the address numbering, the building footprints, the administrative boundaries. I would have also looked at the census and postal data. I would have acquired some high resolution imagery as well. And what I realized in a lot of the projects that I would have looked at, a lot of the different use cases, the national addressing is really only as strong as its base data. The methodology. The overall workflow is structured in a way that it can be repeatable. So the first part of it was the data pre-processing. So there was some projection alignment, some attribute standardization, and topology checks. One of the unfortunate things about the data sets is that I realized that a lot of the naming conventions were completely different in a lot of the data sets because I would have collected them from different agencies that are responsible for housing different aspects of spatial data. So I got some from the GIS unit. I also got some from the Department of Statistics and from Lands and Surveys, all with different naming conventions, all with different ways in which they would have populated the attribute tables. It was a lot of work in order to get it to a place where it was usable. Um, there was the parcel to road association, where I would have done some processing to identify the correct fronting of streets, um, which I will go into later. Then there's some linear references, which I would have converted the roads into measurable routes. And step four would have been some address numbering, where I would have applied some parity logic and sequencing logic. And step five, there was some address point creation and validation. I just want to talk a little bit about the linear referencing process, how the numbers were generated. So the road center lines were converted to routes. I would have established stations every 10 meters along the routes. One of the things that I found in the residential context is that a lot of the established parcels, they were approximately about 60 feet wide. So I decided to use 10 meters out intervals in order to be able to make sure that I was able to capture each parcel. One of the difficult things is that there were three situations that I would have encountered as it relates to the parcels and the houses and the buildings. There are buildings that have no parcels, which would have been the informal developments. There are parcels that have already been designed, distributed, but there's no actual development that has occurred on the parcel. So there are parcels that exist without the buildings, and then there are the parcels that have the buildings that have already been constructed, that people are living in or operating their businesses. Um, the numbers increased along the route, and one of the things that I did was I applied the parity logic where I would have assigned a left side and a right side. I would have used the buffer where I buffered, I think it was about 20 feet on either side of the road, and what was captured within that buffer was assigned left or right because it was whether it was odd or even. And then this is the Python expression for defining the parity that I have attached here. I'll briefly just go through the results. One thing that I was able to do was each address was established by using the house number that I would have assigned to it, the street name, the subdivision, community, locality, parish, and postal code. So one of the things that I also had to do, I would have met with, I guess, some of the agencies responsible. There was also no clear distinction between the administrative boundaries for the country where it was very inconsistent. So one of the things I had to do was formalize that first before I was able to do anything else. So one of the outputs that you were able to find was that uh, after doing all of the work that I had to do, I was able to produce the addresses. For example, 6 Beacon Drive, Bayview Housing Development, Camps, Bastia St. Kitts, KN1711, which brought together all of the different data sets that I would have found as well as the data that I would have generated from my processing. One from well, the results, the key findings, there was consistent numbering achieved across rural roads and urban streets. However, there were some issues that I found when I was, because I would have used the buffering system. What I found happened was, for example, if you look here along John Lane, it would have captured the the parcels running along John Lane as the positive numbers 246, as you might be able to see. Rather, they should have been captured on Tamarind Court. And that was something that I realized happened afterwards, that there was a little bit of some refinement that needed to be done in order to be able to establish the proper addresses. Similarly, along Cassia Crescent, you would have found that that is one of the areas within farmer developments where there were no established parcels. There were also really any established fence lines to be able to determine the difference in the properties. The imagery was able to help to some extent with that. So it also showed that there was, with informal and irregular developments, it showed that there was a clean progression for the most part, and the address points correctly aligned with buildings, and for the most part, some of the frontage was able to be established as well. Accuracy and validation, multiple validation techniques were used. Like I mentioned, I would have done some imagery comparison. In ARC, I would have done some swiping, to be able to back check some of the information. I would have also overlaid the census information. One of the things is that the census, when it captures the household, there's an address that is assigned. The issue is, as I mentioned, the address, for the most part, has no formal actual structure. So what I was able to do, I was able to link those fields and actually would have given it back to the census very fairly recently, and they would have been looking over it to assess whether or not um, it works with what they're trying to accomplish. I was able to find that most addresses fell within the building footprints or the parcel footprints. There was very minimal positional errors detected, and where that was found, there was some targeted manual correction, and the attributes were reviewed. From the framework performance standpoint, there was strong access. Well, sorry, it was strong across the settlement types. The rural areas, because of the simple geometry and the it had minimal refinement required. The urban areas had higher complexities, which needed a lot more validation. And as it relates to the governance relevance, it would provide better emergency response routing, better development control. It would help with utility connections and management and land administration. Limitations and challenges. There were a lot of data inconsistencies, like I would have mentioned, buildings without parcels, parcels without map buildings. The urban challenges that I would have met would have been multi-building parcels and large commercial lots, which did not well, there had to be some adjustment in the capture area and the buffers that I would have used between the residential and commercial. Um, there was some linear referencing sensitivity, as I would have mentioned, corner lots. There was also some null route measurements and null route values that I would have had to manually update. One of the broader lessons I found is that addressing is not a one-time exercise. It requires continuous data maintenance. Recommendations, it is technically feasible. It can be built on the existing data sets. There just needs to be a lot more cleaning. There also needs to be more population of data. Um, I have some institutional recommendations. I would suggest that addressing be treated as an ongoing government function to integrate into planning approvals, building permits, road naming, sorry. And there have to be some operational priorities where we focus on the urban areas and then establish some standard operating procedures and quality assessment rules. In conclusion, the project successfully designed a scalable addressing framework. It was able to be tested in real communities and it demonstrated some relevance. The framework is, for the most part, accurate, consistent, and is context appropriate for sustainable island states. Um, Addressing has to be about strengthening how the state of St. Kitts and Nevis sees and serves its people. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Shejon. Very good. Very practical example of applying GIS technology to solve a real world problem. Looks like you have a question in the chat window.
Uh, Before coming to Penn State, I worked with a lot of E911 projects for some rural Pennsylvania counties. Apart from standards and technologies, are there any other challenges this readjusting project might encounter when interacting with the public in some of these rural Pennsylvania towns? There's a lot of suspicion and wariness, often related to taxes. You mentioned the difficulty of having the history of colonialism and some squatting. Is buying by the local residents challenging? Extremely. One of the things that influenced this project was I would have also proposed this to the government officials sometime earlier this year. Not the actual work, but just the idea, the concept. And one of the concerns that kept ringing out was that people do not trust the government. They don't trust the government with information. There is a lot of difficulties in people relinquishing the idea of what they had and what they understood as their address for the last 30 years, especially in the squatting environments where I reference this mango tree that has been in my yard for the last 50 years as my address. Betty with the mango tree in her yard, and everybody knows where that is in the community. Having to convince people to use their new addresses, even in small testing areas, has proven extremely difficult. People are very, very unwilling to be able to absorb new information, to use it, because truly they don't necessarily see the importance of it. They feel as if there's, I guess, an imposing of the government on, I guess, their rights to some extent. But one of the things that I would have suggested was a more inclusive approach when we may implement this. One of the things that I want us to do is there are a lot of unnamed streets within the country. And I find that if we may include people in that process, where I would have suggested that at least there's a vote. There's so people propose the names, there's a vote on what the names should be, and if there's at least 51% consensus on, we assign that name to the road, and it makes people feel a lot more included in the process. And I think that's significantly more helpful. It helps people to also not reject what's suggested. And there's a lot more buy-in because there's no clear political agenda, or at least it doesn't seem that way. Thank you very much.
All right, Shazan, if you would wouldn't mind put your contact info in the chat window in case anyone wants to follow up, they can. I want to thank all the presenters tonight. Great job all around. And I want to thank all the audience who showed up to participate. Appreciate that. We'll be having another capstone presentation tomorrow. I believe it starts at 11:30 Eastern. So would like to see everyone here. But until then, I wish you a pleasant rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.